Hello, and welcome to another edition of Health Essentials. I'm Dr. Judith Boice, naturopathic physician, licensed acupuncturist, and fellow of the American Board of Naturopathic Oncology. I'm so delighted that you've joined me. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you about post-traumatic growth. And that's a term that I first came upon about 4 or 5 years ago when I was looking through literature about breast cancer. And I'm sure many of you have heard of the term post-traumatic stress disorder. So it really caught my attention when I saw post-traumatic growth. So I started looking at research and literature, and also I want to offer a deep bow of thanks to Dr. Shawnee Fox, who has done a lot of work specifically with post-traumatic growth and cancer patients. So I want to share with you some of the foundations of understanding about post-traumatic growth and how you can increase the likelihood of whether you've had a cancer diagnosis or you've worked with chronic illness or recovering from a physical injury, to increase the likelihood you'll go down the path of post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress. So first, a definition. This is the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of stress, or trauma, rather. Trauma is a disordered psychic or behavioral state resulting from severe mental or emotional stress or physical injury. And the other piece they found in research is the more endangered you feel, the more likely that you feel that you are to die, then the more traumatized you are likely to be. So how are some of the ways that trauma shows up? One is by having flashbacks of the actual events that occurred. Another is fears coming up. You may also have re-experiencing. You may feel like you're right in the midst of the event again. So like, for example, you drive by the hospital and boom, there it all is right in front of you again. You may also then experience avoiding triggers. So for example, choosing not to drive by the hospital or not going to the doctor's office or not calling friends or family you associate with the period of trauma. Mood changes. You may have experiences of self-blame, shame, anger, sadness, a whole range of different emotions. Hypervigilance, and this is true for most cancer patients in general. After having been diagnosed with cancer, there's almost always a heightened awareness of any symptom in the body, potentially being a signal, a heralding of the return of the cancer. But it isn't just in relationship to physical symptoms. There can be hypervigilance in general. And these symptoms do not necessarily return to baseline over time. The research is showing about 22%, 21.7% of cancer survivors end up with post-traumatic stress disorder at 6 months. At 4 years, only about 6% of cancer survivors have post-traumatic stress disorder. So 22% at 6 months, about 6% at 4 years. And that was really brought home to me one time when I was speaking. I was doing a continuing education event. I was giving an update about lung cancer, and I sat down afterwards next to one of my colleagues, and he looked white as a sheet. And I said, "How are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm a colon cancer survivor, and your lecture just brought all of that back up, and I'm not doing very well right now." So that really taught me the importance of being mindful, being aware that when I share about cancer information, whether it's with students or with fellow colleagues, that it can trigger a lot. We may have been the person who went through cancer ourselves, or it may have been that we accompanied a friend or family member through their experience of cancer, and we may have become traumatized in that process too. So what's the conventional treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder? Generally, it's drugs for anxiety or for depression, or cognitive behavioral training, which is the gold standard right now for behavioral change and psychology. What's tricky, though, is both of those approaches potentially end up suppressing or leaping over the growth that's there, the potential for growth to catalyze transformation. And I'm not encouraging people to wallow in it, but to just simply cover the symptoms. You may miss literally the opportunity of a lifetime. The other thing that I want to point out here also is I'm interested in doing far more than just having people return to baseline. I would love to see people actually make evolutionary leaps as a result of their trauma. So what are some of the benefits that have been discovered with with trauma, such as a cancer diagnosis. One is a deeper sense of harmony in relationships and deepening of relationships in general, deeper intimacy, greater intimacy. Also having a renewed appreciation, or perhaps new appreciation, of friends and family, a greater sense of wisdom, resiliency, and strength, and also a deeper sense of what really matters in life. That's something I saw with almost all cancer patients. They're really, really clear about what's important to them in their lives. And then a deepening of spirituality, or if you don't relate to the term spirituality, then a deeper inner life as a result of the trauma. Some examples, some of the earliest research that was done with the idea of post-traumatic growth was with war veterans. And researchers asked prisoners of war if they felt that they had benefited from their experience. And 61% of the POWs held in captivity reported that they benefited from that experience, whereas only 30% of regularly enlisted soldiers who were not POWs said that they benefited. So twice as many of the soldiers, the ones who were prisoners of war, reported benefit from that experience of captivity. And that made me think of Senator John McCain, because one of the potential outcomes, post-traumatic growth outcomes, is a deepening and expanding of someone's sense as a leader. And that's certainly been true for Senator John McCain. I may not agree with all of his politics, but he is a living example of the power of post-traumatic growth. And one of the reasons that Senator John McCain is considered a war hero is that he was offered the opportunity to be released early, and he said, "No, I will not do that until all of my fellow soldiers are released as well." So he remained in captivity longer than required. So that's an example also of his leadership. The bottom line that researchers are discovering is that the more traumatic the event, the greater the potential for transformation afterward. So that puts trauma in a whole different light. I think of all of the new agey ideas that, oh, if you're in line with your spiritual path, if you're in line with what you're supposed to be doing in your life, everything is going to be peachy, easy, hunky-dory. But perhaps those traumatic events in our lives are some of the greatest opportunities to catalyze our growth and transformation. So what are some of the things that you can do? I'm going to offer you 5 ideas for things that you can do to help increase the likelihood that you'll take that path of post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress. And the first is reflection. Mindfulness, there are a whole range of other forms of reflection. It could be prayerful reflection. Sharon Salzberg has written several books. One of them that I find is a really wonderful introduction to mindfulness is called Real Happiness. A second is finding the positive in the situation. And I'm not talking about positive thinking. That's not what I mean. But as a result of that deep reflection, being able to identify some positive outcome. And I don't have time in this presentation to share with you, but a colleague recently shared her story, which was a profound and beautiful story about having been depressed and really struggling all of her life, not sure she really wanted to be here. And then 6 months ago, she was diagnosed with cancer. And she said, out of the depths of me came this voice that said, I choose life. And in that moment, all of the past depression and the things that had been burdening her fell away. So sometimes the trauma of illness ends up having hidden gifts. Social support is really critical. There's some research from women who participated in dragon boat paddling. This is an annual race that happens in Portland, Oregon. There are different teams from all over the city that come to paddle on the dragon boats in a race. And the breast cancer survivor group in that area has had a dragon boat team for years. And so women who've participated in the dragon boat team have had incredible social support, a place for them to express emotions honestly about the things that are happening for them, and also to have mentors, other women they can see who are thriving after their cancer treatment. And finally, the 5th is honest, expressive communication. And that could be through writing or potentially through artwork. There's a wonderful book called Writing as a Way of Healing by Louise DeSalvo. And she goes into how to write in a way that actually helps to shift the psychological, emotional, mental trauma that we've been through. And so as an example, I could write about going to the store and say, I went to the store and I saw my friend Sally and we talked for a few minutes. I came home, I fed the dog. That's just very factual writing. Or I could write from a very emotional, expressive place and say, I went to the store and I was just really overwhelmed when I walked into the store. There were so many people there. I felt kind of scared by the amount of noise and the lights and the things around me. But then I saw my friend Sally, and I was so delighted to see her. And it reminded me how lonely I've been feeling, how cut off I felt from friends and family as a result of the things I'm going through right now. That would be an example of expressive communication. So if you're interested in more ideas about how to incorporate these 5 components, these 5 tools into your life, please do click on the link below. That will take you for a listing, a free handout for you that's a listing to remind you of these 5 elements that can help support post-traumatic growth. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a delight to be with you. Please do join me next week for another episode of Health Essentials. I'm Dr. Judith Boice, naturopathic physician, acupuncturist, and fellow of the American Board of Naturopathic Oncology. You can find more information at www.drjudithboice.com. Thank you.